Watch this video because I've got a quality control procedure I'm using to make sure that the lures that I'm using that are Elastec are actually giving me the effect that I want them to. If you don't, you're going to put one of these on your lure and it's not going to fish right and you're not going to catch fish. So you need to know this QA/QC procedure before you put this on your hook. So what I'm finding out is that the Elastec is great, it's super durable. Its buoyancy is key because it allows the presentation of the lure to be vertical in the water. Stand straight up, right, on the hook you put it at. And that floating technology and the durability of that Elastec is critical. But its buoyancy is the most critical piece of it. And what I have found is that there's some quality control issues with some of this Elastec material actually not floating. It actually sinks. And I've had some people, you know, in other videos make comments that the Elastec material floats, and it does when it's working properly, but I've got to QC it. And by QA/QC, I mean quality assurance, quality control. And I test all of these lures before I put anyone on a jig. So here's what I do. I open up these packages. You know, they're typically sold in packages of 6, or if you store them in bigger quantities, whatever. But you're going to have to take every one and buoyancy test it. And I know that sounds crazy, but watch me here as I've got 2 different colors. I'm using a hula stick. And a hula stick is a great bait. And what brought this around is I was using the hula stick and catching fish. And, you know, I was on a couple of good lots. And I didn't know it, but every one of them was floating. Every one of them was standing up. I was getting great presentation, that great vertical presentation, and the 3 little tentacles on the end of the hula stick were moving in the water, and it was just getting bit. And then I went on a stretch where I wasn't getting bit. I'd put one on and I'd fish it around and nothing, and I'd fish it in those same locations, and you know, I just chalked it up to that day they're not on this bait, or they've seen too much of this, or whatever, and that can happen too. But what it turned out to be is the bait wasn't buoyant, and it was laying flat on the bottom, and the fish were disinterested. So really kind of critical that these things float. Now you'd think that they would QA/QC these things, but clearly they're not, because there's packages in different colors that don't float. Now, not all of them. Some of them you'll hit a package and every one of them floats, and great. So what I do is I get a pail of water and I actually drop each one of them in. I open my packages, I drop every one of them in, and some of them will sink to the bottom if they're bad. Some of them will float wrong side up or stand straight up in the water. They won't float. What you want is those things to lay across the top with super buoyancy. That's how they should be when they're good. So then I pull those off and I'll lay them on a paper towel, and then I'll put them back in their packages and they're good to go. But there's some pretty impressive percentages of them being bad, and really they're useless to me. If they're just laying on the bottom, they take the whole jig and lay it down flat, you might as well use a chunk of a Senko or something. So you have to make sure that these things float, and I do this buoyancy test with them all. I've checked multiple packages, different colors, and like I said, I've had 9 out of 16 float before in certain colors. And then here I'm going to go through this and I'm going to do one for you. I'm going to open a package of 6. I've got the molten craw color, and I'm dropping them in one at a time, and here you have it. So here, 1 of 6 or 2 of 6 don't float. So those are going in the garbage for me, and the rest are going to get dried out and go back in the package. But critical for that stand-up jig approach. Don't get caught like I do. I've fished for days at the time of the year when these things should be working, in areas where they should be working, and had them not work. And the reason they didn't work is because they were laying down on the bottom. So that tip for you today: QA/QC your Elastec. Make sure everything is floating. It's one of those attention to detail items that can be the difference between a great day on the water and maybe big fish of the day, and being blanked and not having answers to the problem when you're out there on the water. So check them out, make sure you QA/QC, and we'll talk to you next time on the water.